Glad that you're all here. We missed some of you last week, but I'm glad you're back this week. Danny is continuing his series on how hard or simple Christianity is. And welcome, everybody. I'm glad that you're all here. Oh, I guess y'all don't want to hear it twice. Anyway, so I'm going to turn it over to Danny, and he
can. Are we live? Does that mean we're live on YouTube?
That means we're live on YouTube.
Right. And that's and recording as well.
Yes, sir.
Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning. I know you're disappointed that we're finished with the Beatitudes. I know you're really tired, sorry about that. We have changed our title slightly because we were calling it Christianity Simple and Complicated, the Beatitudes, but we're moving on. So what's it say today, Dale?
Okay. Christianity, simple or complicated, number 12. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, number 1. The unexamined life.
Now, I'm curious, Dale, are you saying Sermon on the Mound or Mount?
Mount. I probably said mound.
Oh, it's okay.
But it is Mount. And I lost your
video. Has anybody that's been over there, is it a mound or is it a mount? It's not really a drastic mountain, I don't think. But last week, by the way, you'll be happy to know, was Sermon on the Mouth. Thankfully, someone caught that. That would have been a whole new discussion. So what we did with the Beatitudes, we had 3 different interpretations. You can go back and check those out on our website, or you can check them out on YouTube if you missed those. But that was centered in on the 2 little words that Jesus would say to people, and that's follow me. And we really expanded that to understand what in the world he meant by that, and what a huge and marvelous and daunting invitation it was when Jesus said, follow me. And I wanted to spend just a minute because we have a very rich resource here in Chris Reynolds. He mentioned this at one point in our conversation, and then he and I talked after class. And I said, I really want to expand that further. And he said, okay. And so we're going to do that right now. So this idea of following Jesus, of Jesus saying, follow me. We talked about how it's not just leaving your nets and, that was a big deal, leaving your business and going, but it was literally come and let me show you how to live. And that's where we're shifting now in our study as we start to look at his Sermon on the Mount. But Chris, tell us a little, start like we've never even talked about this, I guess.
Absolutely.
Going up a mountain in Nepal. What mountain were you going up?
Going through mountain ranges in Nepal, down through the base of Mount Everest and that area. And in order to do so, you hire a group of Sherpas. Now, the Sherpas, they sit there and they're very exact in their instructions. They tell you that when they go down a path, you walk the way they walk, you step where they step. When they speed up, you speed up. When they slow down, you slow down. And there's an exact reason for this. The trails are very treacherous. There's a lot of loose rock. The footing is not very steady. And if you don't step how they step, there's a very high likelihood that you could slip off, you could fall off, you could seriously injure yourself. Another thing to take in mind of these Sherpas is you're placing your life in their hands. It's a bunch of strangers you've never met before. They're not the most educated people in the world. Most of the Sherpas, when they're not on duty, are usually beggars. They're in the street, they're begging for food if they don't have work. So you have to take a you would say a leap of faith, but it's a leap of understanding that these people know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And you're placing your life and understanding with a leap of faith.
Now, the word Sherpas sounds plural. Is it plural, or do you have one guide per person?
It is plural. It is a one Sherpa guide and then several Sherpas carrying your stuff behind you.
So how many people, for instance, would be in your convoy or whatever, in your group trying to follow the same Sherpa?
Yeah, so we had a total group of about 40 people there. But they split us off into groups of 5 with the Sherpa lead per 5. And then there's enough Sherpas to have one Sherpa per person, but a majority of them were carrying and only 1 per 5 was leading.
But, just to get, and this is so perfect for what we're talking about when Jesus says, follow me. When that Sherpa says, follow me, and I'm assuming they have probably some sort of an orientation session before you even go up, right? Where they just say, we're not messing around with this, right? This is serious, and are they saying literally put your foot where I put my foot?
Absolutely, they are.
And the reason they do that, correct me if I'm wrong, is the trail changes every day because of the nature of the terrain. The trail is not the same every day. The rocks move, and with all those people going up and down the mountain, the rocks move. And so it's not so much that they're using exactly the same steps. They're just wise enough and smart enough to know where to put their feet.
Exactly.
How difficult was it to keep your eye on that guy? I mean, were there times when you're bound to get tired at some point, right?
Yes.
I mean, were there times when you found your attention wavering, or were you able to just really stay laser focused?
Oh no, you want to look at the path beneath you, look where you're stepping. You want to look at the mountains around you, because that's why you're there, to look at the scenery. It's not easy to stay focused on the guy that's in front of you. And you can tell when people do take their eyes off, because they usually start slipping.
Boy, I knowing what we're going to talk about right now, that is such a beautiful lead in and such an important lead in. I mean, don't take your eye. I mean, yes, there are lots of things competing for your attention, right?
Absolutely.
And some things you want to take in, right? But you have to use your judgment as to when you take a peek, right? And how long would you hike? Would you hike for 3 or 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours, 6 hours? How long would you hike at one?
It was a duration of 4 hours, but not 4 hours continuous. It was an hour spurts. So you'd hike for an hour, you'd take a break for about an hour, and then you'd hike for another hour. But in 4 hour durations a day.
And that was so you could rest a little bit and take a break, because once you get fatigued to a certain point, you start having trouble with your attention, right?
That's right.
Yeah, staying focused. Boy, that is such a beautiful illustration of what Jesus was talking about when he said, follow me. He said, watch me, look at me. And we have stories, and we'll see one of them today, where the apostles or some of his followers would, just by virtue of the fact that they were worn out, or that they were confused and had such a different expectation of who he was and what he was about, that they would take their eyes off of him or take their eyes off of his agenda. But he was very quick to call them back to it. So we're moving in the direction of the Sermon on the Mount. And lest you be concerned, everybody, even though we took a long time for the Beatitudes, we're not going to take the same amount. I mean, we're going to take a while. It'll take us a few weeks, but it's not going to take us 10, I don't think. Because we're going to try to experience, and get ready for this, folks. And if you're taking notes, write this down. We're going to try to, as best we can, experience the Sermon on the Mount as the people, as the original recipients might have experienced it. So, for instance, when Dale preaches, and Dale, you still there?
I am.
Okay. So I know you appreciate and you enjoy people asking you questions during sermon. You don't mind that.
No, not at all.
There would be a point though, if for instance, somebody says, well, I have a question, and you dealt with it and then started to move on, and they would say, no, wait a minute. How many times would you say, no, I really do need to move on?
I don't know, but
it hadn't happened yet.
There is a point.
Yeah, there is a point. So because you have something that you think it's important to share, and the Holy Spirit has been involved in your preparation, and I know you, and I know the way you work. I know the way I work, and it's not like you sit down on Saturday night and think, I wonder what I'm going to preach about Sunday. I mean, this is it's not, I wouldn't call it a burden, but they don't let me put words in your mouth, but this is something that you dwell on pretty much every waking moment to a certain degree. Is that right? I mean,
I'm definitely processing a text, and I think we went over how I do it, but
yeah, we did.
I'm working through Acts, and I will process that text. I'll read it every day, and I'll process it daily. It's not, and I really feel like God has given me a direction. And so, there is a time when the questions become a distraction from what I believe God wants delivered. But
the questions are important because they let you know where your audience is. And all right, so let's then move into this sort of beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. What comes next on our worksheet?
Do you want to talk about the title again, or?
Yeah, let's go ahead and read the title, and then yes, definitely the title.
Okay. Sorry, I'm going to pull it up so everybody can see it.
Great.
All right, Christianity, Simple or Complicated, number 12, Jesus's Sermon on the Mount, number 1, The Unexamined Life. Does the title of this lesson bring anything to mind? I assume you mean the unexamined life part?
Yes, sir. Come on, folks. Let me hear from you. Where have you ever heard that phrase? What does that bring to mind?
Unexamined. New. I'd never heard it before.
Dale, I'm going to pick on you if you don't pick on somebody else. I can't see who's here.
Okay.
I would ask, whose unexpected life? You talking about Jesus's unexpected life or mine?
Well, that's not unexpected, Steve.
Say again?
It's not unexpected. It's unexamined.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Well, unexamined, the same thing. Whose life are we examining or not examining?
Okay, that's good. All right, we'll address that. Anybody else?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of you because I've already read the worksheet, but I do think, I think a lot of people live life unexamined. We don't really consider what life should be or where we should go with it. We respond to circumstances, and we don't really spend any time prepping ourselves for these things. And
right.
That's what I think of.
So if you want to write something down, write this down. 400 BC, 400 years before Jesus was born. A fellow was killed in Greece. He was a philosopher. and his name was Socrates. And he was about 70 years old when he was called before the authorities and said, "We don't like your philosophy of life. We don't like what you're teaching. We feel like you're causing issues in the not just the community, but in the country. And we want you to stop teaching what you're teaching. And we want you to drop this idea of the unexamined life, and that the unexamined life is a wasted life." Because what he was talking about, so getting back to Steve's comment and question, Socrates was talking about the personally unexamined life, me not examining my life, not you know, and the reason that one of the reasons that the powers that be didn't like Socrates talking about this is because they wanted very much to tell their people what to think, what to believe, what was important, what was not important, so then they control how they live. And Socrates was a philosopher who, very famous philosopher, I'm sure everybody's heard of him. And that we got that phrase from him. And a lot of people now over the years have borrowed that idea. For instance, there was a very popular book about 15 years ago, maybe longer than that, called The Purpose-Driven Life. Many of us read that, yes?
Yes.
And that's the same concept, the same idea. And so it's interesting that Socrates, 400 years before Jesus, and then pretty much all of the quote unquote self-helpers, lots of pastors and preachers, lots of psychologists, lots of life coaches have borrowed on this idea as well, that you shouldn't live an unexamined life. Now, what in the world does that mean? Well, let's get farther into that. And we're not taking a break from it. All of this is going to build on each other as we work through it. And if we don't get through all of it today, that's fine, because this is a North Star concept. This is an anchor idea that we're working on. We need to get on the same page. We need to get conversational about this so that as we approach the Sermon on the Mount, whether we agree or disagree with each other, at least we know what we're talking about. So I put in this Dale reminded me of you and an experience that we had on the beach all those years ago, whenever we went and did that, and I did that wedding on the beach. Remember that?
I do.
And the folks that wanted us to do that wedding, that had contacted me because of all the articles in the newspapers that I used to write, were actually from Iowa, and they were Harley Davidson people. And so they had ridden down, I don't know, 20 or 30 of them had ridden down from Iowa. I didn't know there were Harley Davidson people in Iowa, but apparently there are. And ridden down all the way down to the valley for this wedding on the beach. And I borrowed a Harley Davidson shirt and put it underneath a shirt like this. And I had this shirt buttoned. And once we got ready to do the wedding and was all there on the beach and gathered around, it wasn't nearly as pretty as what we saw with Kendall's wedding, yeah, and Joshua's wedding. We were just all sort of gathered around in a circle trying to hear each other. And I unbuttoned that shirt and I showed it to them. Now, one of the statements that Harley Davidson people that ride on a regular basis, that ride together, and not just them, but most motorcycle people, I would assume, one of their philosophies of life is this statement that's on your worksheet. And what does that say, Dale?
Agree or disagree? It's the journey, not the destination.
Do you agree, or what do you think, Dale? What in the world does that mean? It's the journey, not the destination.
Well, if you focus on the destination, you miss the journey. You miss the process of the journey. But yeah, I was thinking about this because I would have always said that I was it's the journey, not the destination guy. And in some parts I am, but the destination is also important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Chris, getting back to your situation, even though you were told your life depends on putting your feet where these guys were telling you to put your feet, where they put their feet, you still didn't want to miss what it wasn't about the destination, was it?
No, absolutely not.
It was about the experience. It was about and so, those of us that, I remember, this is, I didn't live by this philosophy. I don't know how many of you do or did or have or don't. When I graduated from high school and went to college in Abilene, and the speed limit was 55 miles an hour, that was a 12-hour trip. I wasn't thinking about the journey. I was thinking about getting there. The journey was the journey was just the problem. And until I got a little bit older and started really enjoying, well, quite frankly, realized that at some point I was probably going to lose the ability to take that journey myself. In other words, I was going to have to stop driving a car because of my vision. That changed. And that changed pretty early in my life, probably when I was 30 or so. And it became for me about the journey and not the destination, and not just driving or riding a motorcycle. And not that I rode a motorcycle much, but I did ride it some. But what you guys just did, you just drove like crazy up to the Metroplex, up to Denton, and then turned around and flew. I would come back with all kinds of stories because I was observing. I was, man, if you can ride on an airplane, of course I don't know now in the era of COVID, but back when you were packed like sardines and you were sitting next to somebody, I pretty much had a story every time I got through riding on an airplane. Because of the interesting person that I got to sit next to. It was about the journey, not just the destination. So that is the reason I would put that at the beginning of this conversation, is that is a philosophical statement. All right. That is a way of approaching life, and a way of approaching travel. And that is, hey, don't get all caught up in just trying to get there. Enjoy the trip. See what's around you. So having said that,
Can I speak to this for just a second? I won't
Sure.
take up much time.
No, I'm not worried about time. Because if we don't get through, we'll move on next week.
I don't know when this changed in me, but there was a time when the goal of a trip was to see how many hours you could accomplish it in. And so that meant no bathroom breaks, shut up and sit there. And I got to drive. And at some point in my life that changed, and I began to enjoy the journey. Like every stop was an adventure. Every decision about what road to take was part of the decision making. I've gotten to where I really enjoy the journey part, except for the cruise control thing. And it really makes it for a much more enjoyable adventure when you enjoy the journey and not just focus on the destination.
And I want to keep wanting to move on, but I want to share one other thing. One of the best vacations experiences that I ever had, and I've had some beautiful vacations with some wonderful people. A buddy of mine flew into Seattle. I was already there to visit my sister. I'd driven up from Fort Worth and was in Seattle, and a golfing buddy of mine flew into Seattle from Austin, and we got in my Explorer and we drove straight up into Canada, and we got on that Trans-Canada Highway, Jack and Nancy, and we went over the Continental Divide, and we stayed in Revelstoke. Is that right, Jack? Revelstoke
That's
one
right.
night. The cool thing about this trip, and it just happened to be this guy was cool with that because this is sort of the way he lived his life anyway. We did not have a plan. We didn't know how far we were going to drive every day. We were going to play golf. If we saw a golf course that looked fun or interesting, we pulled over and played golf, which meant then we had to find a place to sleep. And we didn't have an RV or anything, so we had to find a little hotel or something. And it was just such a marvelous vacation. Has anybody else ever taken a vacation like that where you just,
Yep.
we didn't know where we were going to eat. We didn't know we didn't have reservations in a hotel. It was just, all we knew is that at this moment in time, about a week and a half after we started, I had to have my friend in Denver so he could fly back to Austin and go back to work. Has anybody else ever taken a vacation like that?
Yes, been there, done that.
What do you think about it? Would you recommend it?
Yes, I would. There's so much to see on the road.
Yeah. So let's go ahead though, because I do want us to I know we're running short on time. I do want us to get into this riddle and talk about it for just a minute. So let's go.
A riddle. What two things do you have that you don't realize you have, but you use every day to do nearly everything you do? Drum roll. Nobody's actually going to do the drum roll? Okay. The two things are your worldview and your philosophy of life. What is your worldview? Your worldview is a combination of two things: your belief about how the world works and the way you fit into the world.
Okay, let's stop right there and talk a little bit about that. Two things go into making a worldview. And look, folks, I told you last week, if you were with us last week, I said, do some research. Go online, look at, well, if you did, you found 1,000 different concepts about worldview and ideas about worldview. And these days, because we are seem to be such a contentious group of people online, there are people that want to make it all about faith and all about Christianity or all about religion. Then there are other people that make it all about politics, and then there are other people that want to make it all about culture. But you got to understand, all of those things go into worldview. All of the, what you believe about God is part of your worldview. What you believe about the country that you live in, that's part of your worldview. How you view people from other places, how you view the people in your country. When you see a person that doesn't look like you, a person with a different color skin, or a person that has a different level of education or no education, or a person that doesn't have any money or has lots of money, your worldview, it's all rolled into it. Your worldview, our worldview. And by the way, if there are, are we up to 8 billion in the world yet? Moving in on it, if we're not there. That's how many worldviews there are. Okay. And a lot of it we inherit. We inherit it from our parents. And then there's a point called adolescence where we start questioning everything our parents, and they don't know anything, right? Our parents are idiots during adolescence. And so, but at some point you start to realize, well, maybe they're not wrong about everything. And then maybe they're not wrong about hardly anything. And you slowly, anyway, you develop your own world view, your belief about how the world works. And the second part is just important. The second part of the definition is how you manage that. How do you fit into a world that works the way you believe it works? Okay. So that's worldview. And out of worldview flows the next idea, and it's called your philosophy. And you notice it says in each one of these, your worldview. That's because it's yours. It's not your wife's. Hers is probably a little bit different. And they may be similar, hugely similar, but I guarantee you there's a point at which they diverge. It's your worldview and your philosophy of life. And what definition did we come up with for that?
So your philosophy of life are the rules and regulations for how you live your life. It is your owner's manual for living. It flows out of your worldview.
So obviously, if you have a worldview that says this is the way I believe the world works, and this is the way I fit into it, then without realizing it, this is the thing. Remember the riddle. What two things do you have that you use every day to do nearly everything you do, but you don't really realize it? And that's your worldview. And out of that worldview grows rules and regulations about how you live your life. And here's the rub. And here's what's going on right now in our country and really around the world. It's a human thing. If my world view has written this particular owner's manual for me, and that's the way I think life works, and that's the way I think I should fit into, and I bump up against somebody with a different worldview who has a different owner's manual based on their worldview, and it's not like mine, then I got two ways to respond to that. One, they're an idiot because they don't see the world the way I do. And I respond negatively. I see them negatively. I have a low opinion of them, and I'm very critical of them. Don't want to spend any time with them. Don't want to have anything to do with them. There, by the way, is another reaction to that. And that is, I've just met somebody that's not like me, that sees the world differently than I do, and that has a different owner's manual for how to live life. That's interesting. I'd like to get to know that person. I'd like to get to know their point of view. And so I'm going to try to have a relationship. I'm going to try to have a dialogue. Now, we all with them, and it doesn't have to go negative. The struggle is that that's easy to start that way, but once you find out enough about a person and you realize that there's vastly different concepts about how to live, and then you start drawing lines and you say, well, I can't go there, and I can't go there, and the next thing, and it's very difficult to maintain a relationship with someone who has a completely different worldview, because obviously I do things the way I do things because I think it's the right way to do things. So, but this worldview idea, all of us have it, and all of us have a philosophy of life, and it informs. So, just a few examples of that, I believe, is what comes next. Is that right, Dale?
Well, your worldview is how you perceive people. That's what's next.
Okay, what I'm going to do now is we're just with three little statements, and finally the main statement about it is I want to sort of give you examples of what a worldview, philosophy of life, and how they affect and what they look like. So here we go.
Your worldview determines how you perceive people. Your philosophy of life informs your relationships with those people. Your worldview shapes your view of the past. Your philosophy of life determines your relationship with the future. Your worldview determines the significance of material things. Your philosophy of life is reflected in your relationship with material things. Your worldview is what you believe. Your philosophy of life is what you do.
Okay. And then there's one little statement that comes next, or one little sort of fill in the blank, right?
Yes. Why is the word nearly included in the riddle?
Any idea? It says nearly all the time. So the riddle is, what do you have? And so what I'm saying is you have a worldview and a philosophy of life, and you use them to do everything you do, nearly everything you do. Why would I say nearly? Because each and every one of us can think about many times in our lives where we have, because of different situations, you might call it peer pressure. Or you might call it changing your mind, having a shift in your worldview, where you do something that goes against the owner's manual, that flows out of your worldview. And sometimes that turns out bad. And you say, what do you say? I knew I shouldn't have done that. I knew better than that. Anybody ever said that? I mean, and it's because you broke your world. It's because you know that based on your worldview and the rule book that follows that, your philosophy of life, you went against it. But then there are other times when you have a shift in your worldview and it changes. And oftentimes when a shift in your worldview, it can be a minor shift or it can be a major shift. And if it's a major shift, then all of the people that you are affiliated with, and especially the people you're close to in your relationships, your husband, your wives, your kids, your aunts, your uncles, the people you go to church with, the people you work with, the people you go fishing with, the people you play golf with, depending on what, or whatever it is you do, whatever fits into your people you have barbecues with, whatever. If you have a major shift in your worldview, and which of course means that you're starting to, then you start to react to things differently than you used to react to them. What's the reaction going to be to these people who've known you all those years, and now all of a sudden you're doing things differently than you used to?
They're going to wonder what happened.
Yeah, what's going on with him? How many times have you either been involved? And I'm not talking about you. How many times have we been involved in conversations that start like this? Did you hear about so-and-so? What's up with them? Well, either they have broken a rule in their philosophy of life, or more significantly, changed their worldview. Now, years ago, instead of saying worldview, there was this word that nobody really understood unless you're in the business world. And the word was paradigm. How many of you have ever heard the word paradigm?
Yes.
It's not 20 cents, okay? It's not 2 dimes. A paradigm is a construct. It's a worldview. It's a way that you see things. And it was very popular, and I'm talking about late 70s, early 80s, in the business world, when it was really all about businesses being either stuck in their ways or agile and evolving, and the businesses that were agile and evolving and keeping up with the changes in the world, they were businesses that were having paradigm shifts. I want to tell you a story real quick about this. And yes, I know we're running out of time. That's okay. Don't get agitated. But I want to give you an example, because I just want us to make sure that we understand and we're on the same page with this worldview / philosophy of life. So a paradigm shift, or a shift in your worldview, but let's talk about paradigm shift for a second. I'm going to tell you a story. So this story happens in New York City years ago. Guy just businessman gets on a subway, and it's a sort of a strange time of day, maybe late at night. So there aren't a lot of people on it. And when he gets on, there is a man that's there, and he has two young children. Oh, they're 6, 7 years old, boy and a girl. And it doesn't take him very long to realize that this man, this father, has lost control of his kids. And so he's sitting there, our businessman is sitting there trying to read his paper, or trying to look at his notes from his business meeting or whatever, minding his own business. That's what you do in New York City. You don't talk to other people on the subway. You just do your own thing, right? These days you put in earbuds and listen to something, And, but he wasn't able to do that because these kids were just going wild. They were, 6, 7-year-old boy and girl just going, bothering people. They actually would walk up to him and slap his book that he was trying to read. Can you imagine how irritating that is? I mean, and the longer this went on, the businessman just got more and more frustrated, and he finally looked over at the dad, who just seemed to be in another world. He just seemed to be oblivious to what was going on. And he got the man's attention, and he said, "Sir, are these your children?" And the man said, "Yeah, they are." And the man says, "Well, don't you see what these children are doing? They are running wild. Can't you do something about it? They're bothering everybody, mainly me. They're bothering everybody on the train." And the father looks at the businessman, and for the first time, the businessman notices that the father's eyes are a bit swollen, a bit red. And even as he's looking, as their eyes are meeting, he notices that there is a little bit of tear that's sort of coming down the cheek of this father. And the father says, "Yeah, we've just come from the hospital where their mother died. And they're just not real sure what to think about that." Well, the businessman that was writing this book, his name was Stephen Covey, by the way, said that was a titanic, even though didn't affect his whole life, but it was a titanic paradigm shift. Or if we use the words that we're dealing with today, concepts, it was a huge shift in his worldview. Because all of a sudden he went from resenting the fact that these kids are acting out to having a broken heart over the fact that the kids didn't know how to act because they just seen their mother die. And it completely changed his view of the situation. Now, why would I bring this idea, this concept of worldview and world philosophy and philosophy of life up at the beginning of a conversation about the Sermon on the Mount, about Jesus, his Sermon on the Mount? Let's go ahead and read a few excerpts from the Sermon on the Mount. See if we can really quick determine, be watching for what these come from from the beginning of the sermon. What do all these things have in common? Dale, do you mind taking us through those short little excerpts from the Sermon on the Mount?
Sure. Y'all can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, "You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in with her in his heart. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all. You have heard it said that it was said, eye for an eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. What do all of these excerpts from Jesus' sermon have in common?
Pretty obvious, Dale. Let's talk about it. What do they have in common?
You heard something. I'm going to tell you something else.
All right, folks, understand in the huge view of what Jesus was trying to achieve with his ministry, with his life, he's introducing in this sermon. Remember, we've talked about how the Beatitudes were an introduction, not just to the Sermon on the Mount, but an introduction that Jesus introducing himself. Well, the Sermon on the Mount is a continuation of Jesus introducing himself. And when you start with the words, you've heard it said, what you're saying is, now I know you've always thought. Then Jesus says, but I'm going to tell you, and another way to say that is, I want you to change the way you think. And using the terminology that we're using today, he's saying, I know you've been laboring and living with one worldview, with a specific worldview for a long time. You've built your whole life around it, your relationships around it, your faith around your worldview. I'm here to tell you that if you follow me, keep your eye on me, put your feet where I put my feet, put your priorities where I put my priorities. Search out to know God the way I search out to know God. If you follow me, all that's included in that, your worldview must change. You've heard it said, but I tell you. So Jesus, once again, is upping the stakes of telling people, of inviting people to follow him. Are you really ready to change the way you think about nearly everything? And if you change the way you think, it's going to change the way you live. Are you ready to do that? Then follow me. So this is where we're going to be going. And that's I think that's a good place to stop today. I would like to encourage you, as I do from time to time, folks, read the Sermon on the Mount. It's only 3 little chapters, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Read it in different translations. Read it in the Message. Read it in the Voice. Read it in the King James Version. Read it in the New King James Version. Read it in the NIV, the New International Version. Read it in go to BibleGateway.com, BibleGateway.com, and click on the drop-down box and see all the translations that are there, and find some wacky, weird translation you've never heard of, and read the Sermon on the Mount in that translation. Get as many different points of view as you can. so that as the people of God in this place attempt to follow Jesus, understand from him really what that means. Because what Jesus is saying is examine your life. Don't be a ping pong ball bouncing off of paddles with no point except where the paddle happens to be pointing. Don't react. Reflect and respond. Because you've heard it said, but I tell you, ... Dale?
So I'm super excited about this because I believe that we do need to make sure that we understand our worldview and philosophy of life and live accordingly. So I'm excited about continuing this. I'm excited to hear how Jesus examines worldviews and philosophies and tries to reshape them for us. If you have your communion emblems, grab them. We're going to do communion together. I'll give you just a second. All right. So one of the things that I think we have to be very aware of is that Jesus's intent in his teaching, his intent in his life, his intent in his sacrifice was to build a bridge between us and God, to tear down a wall that separated us, and he accomplishes that on the cross. And so every week we celebrate this reality. We celebrate the truth. And I'll be honest with you, this is one of the worldviews that had to change in me. And that is the belief that I somehow have accomplished something in order to achieve the grace and the mercy of God. And the truth is, it was accomplished by Jesus. And we celebrate that. We give thanks to him for that. And every week we partake of communion to remind us that it is the body and the blood of Jesus Christ that rescues us from death to life. And so we partake of bread and juice that represents the body and the blood of our Lord and Savior. And it helps to every week be recentered by this moment. So I'd like to pray over that with you and share this with you. Let's pray. Father God, I just thank you so much for your son, Jesus. I thank you so much for your love for us that compelled you to send your son to the world. I thank you so much for the commitment that Jesus made to fulfill his purpose in this world, that he maintained his focus on you and on what your will is and what your will was. And I just pray, Father, that as we partake of this bread and this cup, that we call to remembrance the great sacrifice that was made on our behalf, that we call to remembrance the access that we've been given because of that sacrifice, that we call to remembrance the purity that you offer through the blood of Jesus Christ. And I pray that we always be thankful to you for this awesome gift that you've given us. And I pray, Father, that you will be, that we will never take for granted the beautiful grace and the beautiful mercy and the beautiful love that you poured out on us. Bless this bread and bless this cup as we partake. In Jesus' name, amen.